Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to highlight relevant research and practical applications from esteemed leadership experts and practitioners. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Margaret Morford, who has worked as an attorney specializing in employment law and has been the vice president of human resources for 3 large companies. She is an often quoted business expert in newspapers and magazines across the country, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and USA Today. She is also the best-selling author of 2 business books, Management Courage, Having the Heart of a Lion, and The Hidden Language of Business, Workplace Politics, Power, and Influence. And that's going to be our topic for today's program. Thank you for joining me today, Margaret.
Thank you for having me.
So the topic, like I said, today is going to be around workplace politics. And this is a pain point for many people. And unless you've been living under a rock in some remote area of the world, you deal with politics every day, most especially at work, regardless if you're in the office or virtually. People say, if they say that they are not dealing with it, they're probably either lying or, unfortunately, they are probably destined to fail. I have found that everyone has an agenda, and as they're trying to accomplish their agenda, they want to do so in the most efficient way possible. So let's start with some of these questions around workplace politics. And you call it the hidden language of business, which I think is a great name for it because we want everyone to be effective in a positive, ethical way. Why should leaders not think of politics as being shameful, unethical, or manipulative? What is a better way of thinking about workplace politics?
Well, politics, so often people believe that if they're right, that's all that matters at work. But it's not just necessarily being right. You need to be effective. And politics is really the glue between those 2 things. It's important to be smart. It's important to be bright. It's important to work hard, but it's also important to read all the unspoken messages that go on in the workplace and understand those really well. I talk a great deal about politics, but we're going to talk about positive politics today. Most of the stuff, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is that most of the stuff that's out there is pretty mean stuff. It's about how to step on people, how to use them, how to discard them. That's not what I would talk about at all. But I think you need to be smart about how you manage your career, smart about the people that you're dealing with, smart about where your organization is going. And most people, when they reach a certain level in their careers, past sort of the beginning of their careers, most people lose their job because of politics. Now, they're given a reason, but there's really about 3 reasons why you lose your job. Your organization has changed direction and you're out of step. You've run afoul of somebody who's powerful in the organization. That will wreck your career or certainly stagnate it pretty quickly. Or, and here's the biggest blind spot of all, you haven't built a wide enough network to support you when you make a mistake. You're going to make mistakes all the time. The question is, can you survive the mistake? And politics is about how you manage all of that in your career.
I would definitely agree with you with those political blind spots. And I love how you really do need to build that network of supporters, right? Because inevitably you are going to make those mistakes. You want people there behind you to support you when these do happen. And there's ways in which you can do that more effectively than others. But really want to get into how has workplace politics changed with the advent of remote or hybrid work, or is it the same?
Well, it's become more difficult, significantly more difficult, because a lot of us are working remote. A lot of it's done by phone. A lot of it's done by electronic communications. A lot of it's done by Zoom. And when you're looking at Zoom, everybody talks about the Zoom stare. It's very hard to read people's body languages. They're pretty good at the poker face thing. We've all had 2 years to practice looking interested in what somebody says, even if we aren't. So it really says that you've got to up your political savvy because it's about building relationships, about inviting people into your camp. And that's a lot easier to do in person than it is over the phone or over the internet or however it is that you're communicating with people.
Is there one strategy you can share that would help out in this regard in a remote or virtual or hybrid working environment?
I think that every time people don't think about this, we're kind of the dragnet society. I've got 89 things on my plate that I'm trying to take care of. So I start shooting out however you communicate, instant messaging, email, any kind of text, whatever you're doing. We have a tendency to shorten it to just what we need.
Mhm.
And so, one, you come across as demanding. And two, I've got 20 of these things. So whose do I do first? Well, I do the first one of the person that's warm and friendly, the person that even when they're texting me, they say something personal. I had a client that happened to be a huge car dealer, luxury car dealer. And so when I send them an electronic communication, even when I send an invoice to them, I'll say, I hope you're doing well and selling lots of cars. It just says, I care about your well-being, and I do. I want them to do well. So instead of just saying, here's the invoice, thank you so much, I take an extra sentence, sometimes 2 or 3 sentences. I hope you're staying well in the middle of all of this COVID. Someone told me that you got sick. I hope you're doing well. People don't forget that because it makes me something more than just the thing by which you get the job done. And you work harder for people that you consider you have a relationship with beyond just we're coworkers.
And that's part of building that positive workplace
Yes.
culture and workplace politics and operating in an ethical way. Now, in this day and age, there's so much going on. Everyone is fatigued. Everyone is stressed out. You recommend that we should not talk about being stressed out or burned out at work. Why is that the case?
Well, stress has almost become a status symbol these days. Everybody wants to talk about how stressed out they are, how burned out they are. And we are. That's the reality. Frankly, if you're not a little stressed about work, you're not working very hard. But think about it, what you are giving into your organization, what you are saying about yourself in your organization. Should you deal with your stress? Absolutely. But that's who you talk to your therapist about, your priest, your rabbi, your best friend, whomever you want to talk to. But don't be telling the people that work with you that you're stressed out or burned out. These are the people that determine whether you get the next great assignment. I hope you don't work in the kind of organization where they look at somebody and go, that person is really stressed out. We shouldn't give them this wonderful plum assignment, because if they're at all compassionate, they don't want to give you the one thing that sends you over the edge. Nobody assigns new and exciting projects to somebody who says they're burned out, because they want your best thinking. There's a client I've worked with, and they have an initiative. It's going to be huge, and they're going to pour a lot of time and a lot of money into it. And every single one of the senior level executives are vying to be the one that's going to head up this initiative, because it's absolutely going to make their careers, whoever gets this assignment. And as a matter of fact, one of their VPs came to see me. It's a woman. And she said, I'd like to talk to you about how I position myself so I get selected. So we talked about how you would position yourself. And as I'm talking to the CEO in one of our sessions, it's just the two of us one-on-one. And I asked him, I said, who are you going to assign to head that up? And he tells me, and it's not her. We'll just call her Kathy. And I said, I'm really surprised that you're not going to assign Kathy to do that. And he said, Margaret, I would love to. It is right up her alley. She happens to be the VP of Ops. And this is really heavily operations oriented. So he goes, I'd love for her to head it up. She's perfect, but she walks around here all the time talking about how much work she has to do and that she can't get ahead of her work. And she's shaking her hands and she's stressed out. And he goes, she's valuable. I don't want to assign it to her because I don't want to put any more pressure on her because she looks so stressed and she talks about how stressed she is. So I'm going to assign it to somebody else. So she has missed this plum opportunity because she just kept saying that about herself. Truly, truly, the people folks respect in the organization are the people that are grace under pressure. The other thing she missed is a perfect opportunity to get the assignment, then sit down with her CEO and say, I want to do the best job possible on this project because it's high visibility, lots of money poured into this. So let me show you what's on my plate. And these are the 3 things we could move off my plate. And here's who I would assign it to. It's the perfect opportunity to get rid of 2 or 3 things she doesn't want to do anymore. So not only has she not gotten the plum project, but she's not gotten an opportunity to move some things off her plate she wouldn't want to do.
Well, and that's such a critical aspect of workplace politics, this hidden language, right? Is watching what you say, watching your body language to make sure that it's conveying the right intentions.
Yes.
So that you're not passed up for these opportunities. So people don't perceive that you're overworked, stressed out, you have a bad attitude, you're gossiping a lot. You need to be very mindful of that on a day-to-day basis so that you're perceived in the right way, because there's lots of different power signals that are sent out throughout the organization. I'd love for you to talk about how important it is for these signals to be perceived the right way, but even how do we recognize who has the power and the influence within the organization? And is it easy to tell based on an individual's title or level? I would say personally, no, that sometimes being in a position of power doesn't mean you have power. So, or have the authority necessarily, but I'd love to hear more information and you to unpack that a little bit regarding these power signals that you should be mindful of and how to recognize it in others.
Well, you're exactly right. Title does not convey power in organizations. There are some people that are at the very tops of their organizations. They deserve to be there, but they're not the movers and shakers that are moving that organization forward. They are probably very competent, which is what's put them at the top. But most important of all, there are usually in an organization of about 400, there are 3 or 4 what I call power brokers, people whose feedback makes a difference, people who are able to get more resources than anybody else, people who are able to move their own agenda forward. And so you have to know who those power brokers are. One of the most powerful people in one of the companies that I was part of was the administrative assistant to the CEO. And we'll just call her Kathy. And I'm just going to say this, Kathy was mean. She was just mean, but you don't want to get sideways with a power broker. So I worked really hard to develop my relationship with her. Now, here's the benefit to having a relationship with a power broker. You don't have to like them, but you want them to feel like they have a positive relationship with you. If she didn't like you, she would begin to whisper in the CEO's ear every mistake she'd ever seen you make. And within 30 days, I'd hear him beginning to talk about the fact that this person was incompetent and maybe we needed to look at making a change here. I mean, she was a career ruiner if you got sideways with her. And if you wanted to see him, she was the gatekeeper. So if she liked you and you went to see her and said, I really need just 15 minutes with him, she liked you, she would shoehorn you into his schedule that day. If she didn't like you, she would look at you and say, I can get you in about 3 days. That's the first opening he's got. You know, he's really busy. So does it matter whether, one, you want to know who the power brokers are because you don't want to run afoul of them? Kathy is a good example of what could happen to you. But even more important, once you learn to identify power brokers, you want to work on developing a relationship with them. Because having one of those people in your network is worth 10 of anybody else. And I have seen someone who built a really good network and made a huge mistake at work. I'm talking about a career ender, and they survived it. And the only reason they survived it is, as everybody's going, can you believe Kathy made that mistake or Joe made that mistake? And everybody's talking about it. And everybody knows that Joe's in trouble. Joe's power broker said, yep, that's a pretty big mistake, but that's not normal for Joe. And I've never seen him do anything like that at all. He's smart, he's bright. This was just a misstep. And that was the end of it. And Joe survived it and went on to do really well in the company. So a power broker is worth 10 times in your network what 10 other people could be. And on top of that, you need to understand that because they have so much sway, if they get behind an initiative of yours, it happens because they can make it happen. One of the biggest educations I ever got in my career was, I thought I was being so politically smart. We were going to discuss making an acquisition. And I'm sitting on the senior team. There's 6 of us. And because I'm a smart, I guess you'd call me political animal at this point, I got out beforehand and went to visit the other 4. You don't go visit the CEO, but you go visit. I went to go visit the other 4 people to see where they were on that. So essentially what I was doing is counting the votes before the meeting took place. So I said to one of the other VPs, it's not going to happen because I've counted the votes and there are not enough votes. And the VP looked at me, and this was such a great education. He says, Margaret, I don't think you realize there are 2 people in that room that have 5 votes to the rest of our 1. And then I recounted the votes and realized that it was going to go, which is smart because you don't want to be the person. The reason I counted the votes, again, another political lesson, is I didn't want to be the person saying, no, we shouldn't do it, when it's clear it's going to happen. Sometimes being political is you jump on the bandwagon. This is what I call the rejoice, you have no choice moment. And there's no reason to injure your own reputation by railing against something that's going to happen anyway. It's better to be on the inside trying to fix it.
I think it's a valuable lesson that many leaders need to learn a little bit better, because I've seen that from personal experience and from others that they feel like they need to take this harsh stand, right? That it's, even though it's anti to everything that the organization is pushing forward, they believe they could make a difference. And at some point, you just got to be willing to get on the bandwagon and say, it's going to happen regardless. Why spend the extra amount of energy and anxiety that I'm going to experience in order to try to push this initiative or keep this person or remove this person from the equation if it's not something that's supported by the organization?
Well, so often someone is right and they make huge enemies doing that. You don't do your organization any favor and you don't do yourself any favor. Now, let me be really clear here. This is not about being unethical. If it's an ethical issue, I think you have to speak out. But there are always things your organization is going to want to do that you go, we shouldn't do that. But if the rest of the organization wants to go in that direction, you make yourself a pariah by not getting on board and going, okay, well, the reason I don't think we should do this is 1, 2, 3. Is there anything you can do to mitigate though? Being a voice crying out in the wilderness is not helpful. And I'll give you a perfect example. I got a call from a person who happened to be the chief human resource officer for an organization, and her CEO had left and she had gotten a new CEO. It happened to be a promotion from within. And this was a not-for-profit, so primarily governed past the CEO by board of directors. And she said, I'm trying to backfill my new CEO's position. Her previous position had been COO, so high level position. She says, my new CEO has someone she used to work with that she would like, that she wants me to interview. And it's clear she wants this person to have the job. But I have other more qualified candidates. So what do I do? And I said, well, let me ask you, the person that she really wants, is the person unqualified? And she goes, no, I just have better qualified candidates. And I said, well, there is some benefit to working with somebody you've worked with before. They come up to speed faster. It works better. As long as her candidate isn't unqualified, I think you need to let your boss ultimately hire the one she wants. You can show her other candidates. She goes, I can show her all the candidates in the world. It's clear to me she wants this one. And so I said, then I think as long as there's not an ethical issue for the organization, that's what you should do. She goes, no, I think I'm going to go to the board of directors. We need to be hiring the best qualified candidate. I said, please don't do that. Please don't. There's nothing wrong with what your boss wants to do, and you need to support your boss. May not be what you decide, but it's what your boss decided. Well, she couldn't contain herself, and she went to the board of directors. And six months later, she called me and she was out of a job. So we talked about this. I mean, it's clear this was the reason she got let go. And she said, well, at least I know I did the right thing. Yes, and you're out of a job. I don't know that that's the right thing in the long run. And so you have to learn to read those things and go, where am I going to spend my political capital?
You're absolutely right. Or is this a sword I'm willing to die on, right? It's
Yes.
Absolutely. Can you give us, I'd love to unpack just a little bit more about how do you recognize those individuals with power and influence? Because like you said, it could be the secretary to the CEO, people that have unassuming positions within the organization, but for someone to be politically savvy, it's best if they can identify who those power brokers are as soon as possible.
Well, you're going to have to, they're subtle. They're extremely subtle, and you have to be very clued in and watch interactions. So let me give you two that are really easy to read, but you got to pay attention. A power broker, when they show up late for a meeting, you watch, the meeting will stop in some sort of informal fashion, and someone will say, where we are is. And what they're really saying, the unspoken message that's attached to this is, if Joe or Kathy isn't on board and isn't with what we're doing and well informed, this isn't going to go forward. If the person is not a power broker, everybody accepts their apology. I'm sorry I'm late, but the meeting resumes immediately and they've got to catch themselves up. So power brokers have to be involved, and everybody consciously or unconsciously recognizes that. And here's sort of another negative sort of power signal. When some new initiative is discussed, someone will say, ooh, Margaret's not going to like this. And if they look concerned about it, it tells you it's not going to go forward unless I'm on board. And that should tell you that I'm a power broker. That's very different from somebody going, Margaret's not going to like this, and laughing. That means I'm not particularly powerful and they can't wait to see my face when somebody tells me what we're going to do. You got to pay attention, and you've got to understand who you've got your hand on, because you particularly do not want to get sideways with a power broker.
And that's great, because you really want to understand that political climate within that company, and identifying those key individuals is critical to that. How can an individual then have more self-awareness of how they're coming across, of how they're being perceived by their peers, so that when that promotion comes up, like what we talked about before, there's not that they're going to get that promotion or they're going to get that assignment because they've been deliberate in the way that they want to be perceived. And that's, for the most part, that's the same way that that the other people are looking at them? Because I see a lot of times there's this disconnect, right, of the way they think they're being perceived versus how they're actually being perceived, which all factors into the workplace politics. Would you agree? And how can they adjust their perceptions?
Well, it's very hard to get feedback on yourself, to step out and see how people perceive you. If you're smart, and we talk a great deal about this when we talk about being courageous at work, you got to go get feedback on yourself. And remember, people are reluctant, particularly, and what you're really looking for is negative stuff on yourself, things that you should change, things that you ought to address. So you got to go see people that would give you feedback. I always think this is politically smart. If there's somebody leaving the organization, go have lunch with them, go have coffee with them. People that are leaving the organization are not as careful about what they'll say because they figure they're never going to see you again. And so it's always a great question to ask them, say, you're leaving the organization. And as you're leaving the organization, can you shed some light on what my reputation is within the organization? And then I talk about this a lot in politics. Shut up. The strategic shut up at the right time. Don't fill the space. You want to see what they say to you. Now, they're probably going to start with all the really good stuff. And while you appreciate that, what you're really looking for is, what do I need to change? But don't ask it like that. Say, what do you think people would say I need to do to be more successful? People will help you be more successful. They won't correct you, and they'll go, I don't really want to leave this organization. I don't really want to leave this relationship with somebody upset with me, but they will help you be successful. And a lot of times what goes through their head is, this is my last shot. Now, there are other things you can do to mold your reputation politically. You just need to be aware. For instance, when you're sitting in a meeting, if someone says something that you disagree with, now remember, there's a whole audience sitting there. If it is not going to get the whole meeting off track, you should let it pass, and you should go see them afterwards, one-on-one, sit down with them and say, I've got a bit of a problem with something you said in a meeting, and have a discussion with them about it. They'll appreciate, and I always say, nothing wrong with, and I wanted to come talk with you in private about it, one-on-one. They'll appreciate the fact that you didn't take them on in a meeting, you didn't embarrass them. Everybody remembers the person that takes them on in the meeting. And it doesn't matter whether you're right, you have just made an enemy for life. Now, let's say whatever this person says in a meeting, you believe is going to get the meeting so off track, you need to call a halt to it in the middle of the meeting. Always give the other person room to step back and save face at the same time. When you embarrass somebody, they don't forget it. So here's what I always say. I think when you came to that conclusion, there's some information nobody shared with you that would change how you come out on that issue. And then I give you the biggest fact, the biggest reason for why you ought to change your mind. Now, what I've done, first of all, is tell you unspoken, there's something wrong with that decision. But I've also given you the ability to say, well, given that, Margaret, I think I do. At least I've given you a chance to modify and fix it. And people will never forget when you save them.
No, I would agree with that. You certainly don't want a target on your back. And if you can help them save face and build that relationship, that's one of the marks of a great leader. I know that getting feedback is essential and critical, but I also know as you move higher and higher up in an organization, it's harder and harder to get that honest feedback, especially if you can't find employees that are getting ready to leave the organization. Any strategies to just have that honest feedback to say, it's great to have the kudos, but what I'm really looking for is areas I could improve upon, and it won't go any farther than this.
I just don't think people can bring themselves to do it. Now, here's one strategy that I've used, but I will tell you it's painful and it's grueling. Go see your biggest critic. Go see the person in the organization that thinks you're the biggest waste of salary dollars ever, and ask them what they think of your work. Now, it'll be hard to hear, and they'll say a lot of stuff you'll want to disagree with, but buried somewhere in all of that stuff they tell you is some truth. If it wasn't true, they couldn't keep saying it. So you're going to have to dig through all of that and decide what's true and what's not true. And you're going to have to not get defensive. I always tell people, when you ask for feedback, and it's negative, and you may not agree with it at all, but don't respond. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to teach people why they're wrong about you. There's some reason they're walking around believing that about you, and you've got to figure out what that is. So here's the only thing I think you should say: thank you, I need to think about that. Notice you hadn't committed yourself to saying, I think it's true, I don't think it's true, but you've at least committed yourself to saying, I heard what you said and I want to think about it. Particularly, and I will tell you, this is my nature. I'm a pleaser, which is probably why I became a consultant. I want to help. I have a servant's heart, but criticism is tough. It's tough for everybody. And a lot of times when the criticism is really, really brutal, I just go, that is just not true. That is just not true. That's just not true. And it takes me about 24 hours to think about it. And then I come back and go, could a little bit of that be true? What part of that could be true? And then the feedback is helpful to me. So I've learned to say that so that I resist defending myself. And this is the one person that's given me feedback. You don't want to dry up that feedback. Painful, but it's the only thing that makes you better.
Well, that's great. We've unpacked a lot in this episode regarding workplace politics, defining it, how to identify those power brokers and develop more political savvy on the individual's end. As we're nearing the end of this episode, what would be a first step for them to start to apply in this critical leadership area?
It's the hint I said earlier. Begin to build bridges with people. You have to get over the fact that you got to like everybody you work with. All you need for them to do is feel favorably about you. And so ask yourself, what am I doing to build bridges? Take the person that you have the worst relationship with and ask yourself, what can I do to build a relationship with this person? If you can build it with that person, you can build it with anybody. There are lots of people I've worked with that I don't personally like. Now, I'm pleased most all of them didn't know I didn't personally like them, because I worked hard to build a relationship with them. Who are they? What matters to them? And talk to them in terms of what matters to them.
That's so critical. Like we mentioned earlier, build that network of supporters, because you're going to need that at some point in your career. And it's the best time to start that is today.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Margaret, for joining me today. Let all of our listeners know how they can get in touch with you.
Well, they can go to my website, and the name of my company, which is the HR Edge. So it's theHREdge.net. Or I've actually written a politics book, and you can go to Barnes and Noble and key my name in, and it comes up, and it's got a blue cover. So it's really where I put all these thoughts down, because I thought it was really important to people's careers. Thank you for giving me time to talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart.
Thank you. And this concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to it. It can be found both on Apple and Spotify, and can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know that makes a difference, but what you do consistently.